Good morning, good morning. This is March 9th, Saturday, and we're going to continue on reading from the book in reference to Amazing World of Kreskin, and we're on chapter 16, and so I will continue to read from chapter 16 as soon as I misplaced my glasses. Don't do that very often. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 16. On the first rehearsal of Flip Wilson TV show, the comedian threw up his hands in a warding off fashion and howled, "Don't touch me." I had started toward him. Everyone laughed. Flip said, "You think I'm kidding. Leave my brain alone." He got another laugh, which was the purpose. But there are times when I almost feel as if I'm back in barroom store and peppering him, flashing Portabiti the evil eye. I can sympathize with Mrs. Garnett, very much aware that I'm often considered a bit different. I realize that people sometimes tend to be uncomfortable around me, as if I had an invisible antenna. Mr. Spock has come to visit from Vulcan. Strangers often lump me with psychics and mediums. Some people suspect I'm continually reading minds. There's always the person who will come up to demand, "Tell me what I'm thinking." I've had drunks say, "Levitate me." I'm asked to read fortunes, predict stocks, call the winners of football games and horse races. I patiently explain that if I could predetermine the Kennedy Derby or foretell a hot stock, I wouldn't be spending as much time on jets or coping with night owls at a 2 a.m. Vegas lounge performance. Usually I'm successful at laughing my way out of it or changing the subject, but I never really win. I'm the performer who won't perform in private. The expert who dodges, however. I don't know any professional entertainers who doesn't have the same problem. There are also the how you do it people. They want to know step by step how telepathy works and if psychokinesis is possible. And I don't blame them. But I either have to sound inadequate by admitting that I don't really know, or attempt an explanation about what is known, which can never be satisfying and would take half the night. So I do try to bypass parties unless I'm a paid performer. Additionally, I have to stand around with a soft drink and appear to be enjoying myself. I'm not against social drinking, but gin and thought perception do not mix. Drugs might provide a synthetic sensitivity. Somebody's here. Hello.
Hi, Robert. How are you today?
Hey, now I can hear you. Yeah, it just started reading.
Ugh. Yeah, we got unexpected rain, and today it's really foggy, and it's looking like it's going to do something. Oh, yuck.
Yeah, I got the same problem here, unfortunately. It's the day before we got almost a foot of snow, and the day we got another couple inches, and just doesn't seem like it wants to quit. And every day moves closer to spring.
Yeah, but the weather doesn't know it.
Yeah, the weather does not know it, that's for sure. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the reading, because I think we can finish this up today, which would be nice.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Anyway, he's talking about he's at a party. It says, perception do not mix. Gin and perception do not mix.
Huh?
Drugs provide a synthetic sensitivity or 4 trips of a kind, but I prefer natural methods. Despite numerous recommendations, the phrases of the late Aldous Huxley, Timothy O'Leary, and others, I've never tried LSD, nor do I intend to. I have too much respect for the human brain to turn it into a biscuit on a rainbow. Interesting way to put that.
Yeah.
I do not get myself into messes sometimes. I do get myself into messes sometimes, mainly through a combination of innocence and stupidity. After an opening night in Vegas, I had to do a command appearance at a management party, showing off a bit. I took out a deck of cards, selected one, displayed it, and then showed it back into the deck and about 32 cards down, then riffled the deck without lifting it from my hand, producing the selected card now in the top position. It's pure sleight of hand, but thus far, even with slow motion cameras, no one has caught the transfer. There was an applause, and then I shuffled the deck, cut it several times, and dealt 3 hands of poker, one hand of which I knew would contain 4 aces and a king. Again, it was manipulation, but done faster than the eye could follow. I performed it several times, the aces and the kings always hitting in the same hand. About 20 minutes later, a sleepy-eyed observer drew me aside. "Say, Mr. Kreskin, I'll give you $15,000 to sit in with me tomorrow night." I refused, of course, but he kept calling every day for almost a week. That brought about a decision to stop performing card effects, except for lounge audiences anywhere in the state of Nevada. I seem to have a problem with cards in Nevada. Although I was irked for a while, I'm now only amused that I'm banned from playing blackjack at the Flamingo Casino in Las Vegas. My ban, not the first for someone who works in the mentalist area, resulted from a night when I ran some money to 6 times its original amount in about an hour. However, I did not use any form of ESP as was implied by the flamingo. I was playing from memory of the cards and awareness of the odds and how the deck changed as it was being dealt. The secret in any card game, bridge to blackjack, is causing the deck. Is casing, I think is the word, casing the deck. In blackjack, when a card is tossed off the deck, the odds of another card of that value coming up again immediately lessens. As each 4 or 5 leaves the deck, the statistical odds move to the favor of the player if he remembers the values of the played cards. As an example, if all 5 remain in the deck, I rarely bet anything but the minimal count I allowed myself for playing each hand. As they are played, all cards should be mentally filed away to keep the deck in favor of the player. As the cards come into his favor, it is time to play the higher bids. When the deck remains in favor of the house, the wise blackjack player will stay with a minimal bet. Obviously, when the pitman, the game boss, realizes that the player is casing the deck, memorizing it as it is played, he will instruct the dealer to shuffle the cards more as the deck reaches the halfway point. When it becomes apparent that even shuffling will not favor the house odds, the pitman usually requests the player to remove himself from the table, which is what happened to me at the Flamingo. In fairness, no casino welcomes anyone in my field. The pit boss have nervous spasms. But since I do enjoy blackjack, I'm permitted to play at the Nugget in Reno. I reached an agreement with Jim Thompson, the casino boss, and owner, John Escalaga, that I'd never play for more than an hour and never bet more than $5 a hand. But during one engagement there, using the casing system, I played for 21 straight mornings, usually between 4 and 5, after my last show in the lounge. I kept a record of my winnings and found I had multiplied my original $5 into 400 times that amount. The casing system does work. One area not involving cards that I've completely abandoned as pickpocketing. For a long while, I used it as a warm-up when appearing before businessmen's groups. Mingling with the audience prior to the banquet and show, I lifted a wallet and then singled that person out later to ask, "Could I borrow your dollar bill, please?" While he was frantically panning his pockets, I turned to the subject on stage and make a similar request. As he began to reach, I'd ask, "Sir, do you always carry 2 wallets? What's that bulge in your side pocket?" It backfired several times when a subject wouldn't discover his wallet was missing prior to the show. Once at a Philadelphia smoker, a victim of this exercise called the police before I could return his money. He was irate. I've also stopped lifting watches, which was a variation of the pickpocket routine. Both were leftovers from the Magic Act days. It is often difficult to separate the stage from the offstage. And when my act featured hypnosis, I'd be called on now and then to perform away from the spotlight. Where an entertainer is struggling up, it isn't wise to turn down a club owner's request. Kreskin, my wife wants to stop smoking. How about helping her? I remember treating one such lady, suggesting that the cigarettes would taste horrible, which isn't the way to go about it, and even the smell of smoke would be sickening. And the lady awakened me the next morning to say that she still had the desire, and what could she do about not being able to keep food down? Eventually, I quit the medical area. But there is always the temptation to be helpful. Appearing in a Baltimore at the start of the World Series between the Orioles and the Pittsburgh Pirates, I was asked by a mayor to give a mental assist to the home team. I replied innocently enough, tell them to think positively. The mayor's PR man apparently took the advice to the local papers. The next day, stories appeared on the sports page that Kreskin the mentalist told the people of Baltimore to think positively, implying that 500,000 people could put the Orioles over the top. I even saw street signs that said, think positively for the Birds. They lost 3-4. And flying to Louisville after the final game, I sat beside a man from Baltimore. We began to talk, and he said, "Oh, you're that guy." And every entertainer has gone through the period when he attempts to impress friends off stage, usually for laughs, in a restaurant. I'd ask the waitress to concentrate on an important date in her life and then go back to the kitchen and write it down. I'd jot the date on a calling card and pass it to my dinner companion. On return, the waitress would be frustrated when the two dates, usually the birthday, matched. It would be worth a few minutes of laughs and awe, and fortunately I grew out of that ego routine as well. Although I really prefer college audiences to all the others because of their eager response. Club dates are often fun. 2, other performers, band leaders, waiters and waitresses, stagehands become friends. There's that traditional inside atmosphere, a crazy climate all its own, which is welcomed after a run of campus and down hall dates. Show business camaraderie is, of course, unlike any other and hasn't changed much in a century or more. Now and then, something typically showbiz will occur to afford a moment of warmth and satisfaction. I was walking down the main street of Reno one morning when I spotted Ralph Young, one of the singing teams of the Sandler and Young, on the opposite side of the street. I yelled over, but he didn't answer back. He opened his mouth and pointed to his throat. Knowing that they were scheduled to open that night at the Nugget, I crossed the street. In barely more than a whisper, Ralph said he'd gotten over an allergic attack but had lost his voice. His doctor told him that there was no apparent physical reason, and I had suggested that he seek psychological help. Young was thinking of flying to Los Angeles to see a hypnotist. He was ready to cancel the show, even though the team was due to be on stage in about 10 hours. I reasoned that if the loss of voice was psychological, Young would have to provide his own cure, and or without help. I requested he call his doctor for approval. We met in his dressing room about an hour later, and I told him I thought he might respond to suggestion on an unconscious level and convince himself that he could recover his voice. After proving that he was capable of response, I taught him a simple progressive exercise which lasted no more than 30 seconds, then left the dressing room. I talked to him once more before the showtime and had the feeling that he had licked the problem. When the spotlight hit Sandler and Young that night, Ralph was relaxed, smiling, and sang with his usual ease, without invading psychiatric territory. I administered a simple mental cough drop and felt good about it. There are fun times playing the Hilton in Vegas. I kept getting intriguing but distracting thought. I also had the feeling that 4 separate sets of eyes were staring at me, literally locked on. They seemed to be well in the shadows of the back of the lounge. I did say once, "I don't know who you are, but I'll talk to you later." There was low female laughter from several points at the back of the room. After the show was over and the room had cleared, the waitress came over smilingly widely. One said, "Did you get it, Kreskin? We decided to send you a single thought. You a good lover." They all 4 broke up in laughter. We kept the gag running for a week, and then I was off to Los Angeles. A personal life is difficult. Romance, if that word is still acceptable in these days of women's lib, is a problem, and I'm unmarried. For one thing, almost constant travel forces telephone friendships, and here tonight, gone tomorrow evenings. Yet there is another difficulty which involves, in a way, ESP. Take a new date out, find her attractive and fun, and at one point in the evening there is a suspicious look and a question that is not altogether kidding. "Kreskin, are you reading my mind?" Not guilty, but projecting that slight suspicion into marriage and placing myself in a wife's shoes, I can see that it would be something of a burden. A woman's page editor once asked, "Would you apply suggestibility in a marital situation?" I replied, "No, I wouldn't do anything like that. I am certain that I would. I'm human, as prone to self-protection as anyone else. I am guilty of sensing certain things in ordinary conversation. I tend to read eyes and breathing rates. I do it automatically without thought. The only advantage is the tip-off when someone is becoming tense or bored or wants to change the subject. Most people read the same signs automatically. Perhaps my reaction is a little quicker. I do carry over some habits from the stage, although I attempt to guard against them. Without really being aware of it, I usually walk to the left of anyone, circling around them if I find myself on the right. It's disconcerting, for I'm sure, but I work to my right when doing a concert, simply a habit, and I've always worked to my right when being telepathically guided toward a hidden object. I'm also inclined to jot things down on a slip of paper, simply to remember them. Understandably, scribbling makes a dinner guest uneasy and is insulting. Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
That was my phrase.
Mm-hmm.
So is rolling a coin back and forth across the knuckles of my hand. I have been doing it since childhood and occasionally do it today, quite unconsciously. It's a nervous habit. If I'm talking to someone and suddenly realize that they are studying my hand, I can be certain that a quarter is riding the humps of the knuckles. It usually happens when I'm waiting to go on stage or fidgeting around in an office. Memory off stage is a continuous problem. I think of compensation purposely for the deep concentration required by work. I forget names, misplace papers or keys, and what is most embarrassing, have missed dinner or business appointments, and I must write them down. Then they seem to bypass the psychological block. Although it isn't a part of what I do now, I believe I could still do memory routines in front of an audience. I learned how in high school. My brother Joe used to wheel out a blackboard, and I'd call a teacher to the stage to write down 25 or 30 words, numbering each one as the audience called them out. I'd take one look, then turn my back to the board, matching the correct numbers with the words the teacher read out loud. However, I now feel pretty ridiculous when I go into a large lot and can't remember where my car is parked. I can remember the expression on my date's face when I look helplessly around, and they will say, "Some mentalist." One result of this applied poor memory off stage is that Lou Retta lays out my schedules precisely and on paper as to planned departures, hotel accommodations, local contracts, telephone numbers, where and when I'm supposed to appear, often complicated, sometimes requiring 5 or 6 flights a week from coast to coast. The schedules look like battle plans. But as a general and admirals have discovered, there are times when the best of battle plans go completely awry. Let us call this concert tour number 1, 1973. In good spirits, I arrived at Newark Airport at 7:15 a.m. for a flight to Detroit, scheduled to arrive at 9:30, enabling an 11 a.m. concert in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. For the first time, I was accompanied by a travel manager, Sam Lasigo, simply because of complexities of 12 shows in 8 days. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Approximately gate 17, I was recognized by the airline's smiling key man at Newark. He took me in tow. The chief security man also recognized me, said something about being sure that I wasn't a hijacker, and waved us all through. Falling in behind, we went to the coffee shop, guest of the Genuine Airline representatives who said we'd eventually boarded through gate 21, just relax. Over coffee and jokes, I glanced at the big clock over the counter now and then until my new travel manager, looking out of the window, said, "Isn't that our plane taking off?" The airline man and the security chief promptly disappeared. The big clock was slow. I no longer trust general airline greeters. After a frantic private helicopter ride to La Grande, American Airlines worked out a schedule to get us to Detroit by 12:15 p.m., and the concert finally began about 1 o'clock. I had some difficulty establishing rapport with my audience. The next stop was Hillsdale, Michigan, where a concert at Hillsdale College. We drove there late that same day and were met by the sponsors. One said, "We're sorry you're late for the press conference." "They've all gone home." I asked, "What press conference?" It was a great start, particularly when I found out that the doors were to open at 6:30 for a show we'd scheduled for 9:15. I'd requested selfishly the late time insisted instead of the usual 8 p.m. to be able to watch a Flip Wilson show in which I'd made several appearances. This meant they'd twiddled their thumbs for 3 hours. Didn't you tell the public that it was a 9:15 curtain? I asked. The contract had been written up that way. Well, there was a rumor to that effect, he answered, but don't let it bother you. We'll set up TV in the auditorium so everyone can watch it with you. I groaned. Hastings was next. At 1 o'clock in the following afternoon, a car drove up to the motel. The Michigan booking agent had sent his 18-year-old son, Mike, to take us from Hillsdale to Hastings. The car was loaded with sound equipment. The back seat was crammed. So was the trunk. Huge boxes of amplifiers and speakers, enough to handle the Grateful Dead. I'm not a rock and roll performer, I said. All I need is 2 mics, a table, a chair, and a small folding screen. Why do we have all this? My dad thought we should come prepared, Mike said. So the 3 of us mashed into the front seat and set out for Hastings. What was supposed to be 2 hours turned into 4 hours worse. The heater couldn't be adjusted. It was a constant 90 degrees in the car. I thought our shoes would melt. Arriving at the Chamber of Commerce building, I was promptly told the press left about a half hour ago. What press? I asked. They said, oh, TV, a radio station and a local newspaper. No one told me we could have left at noon. Everyone had a blank look. While I tried to square myself with the press over the phone, Sam and the broker's son went to the school auditorium to check it out. They returned to say that the sound equipment was handled by the custodians and wouldn't work. See, Mike grinned. My dad was right. He set up the rock and roll system. We had Hastings and started out for Detroit at about 1 o'clock. I tried to take a nap, but my feet burning from the heater, and an hour later we lurched to a wild stop on the shoulder. Mike had fallen asleep, and Sam had grabbed the wheel. Sam volunteered to drive, but we had to push the seat forward since he was only 5'5". Mike left us cheerfully at the Detroit airport about dawn, and we slept for an hour and a half before flying on to Indianapolis for a concert at Clues Hall. Everything went beautifully, and I began to think we'd broken the jinx. The next day we flew to Downing Grove, Illinois. A reporter was supposed to meet us at the airport. This time I knew of the arrangement. She wasn't there. The sponsor said, well, I explained to her that you didn't like to meet the press. I couldn't believe it. For 20 years, I'd had fine relationships with newspaper men, radio, and TV people. Now this, it seemed like a plot. I remember clapping my hands on top of my head. He talked on. It was a Sunday, and some religious group had gathered 200 signatures on a petition to stop the concert. They claimed I was in league with the devil. Whatever league I was in, the performance started on time. After it was over, a spokesman for about 14 people said, how about us taking you out to dinner? I was starved and ultimately agreed. At the end of the meal, the waitress dropped the check for all 16 of us into my lap. We flew on to Chicago for a suburban nightclub appearance. A limo picked us up, and I went to the motel near the club to find local press people who had been waiting for more than an hour. By this time, I had a stock answer. No one told me. I had requested a small folding screen to be placed on the stage, and on arrival found they'd nailed it to the backing. A claw hammer solved that, but I didn't solve the warm-up. Emrys, who I was told also played the accordion between shows at the club. Sam came back to the dressing room to say, "There's a guy out there telling jokes that couldn't live in a sewer." Some of the audience was already leaving. I went out earlier than anticipated. At 1 a.m., we went on to the Butler Airport, a private field in Chicago. The nightclub had chartered an aircraft up to fly us to Saginaw, Michigan, where I had a 10 a.m. town hall performance. There was no plane. After 5 or 6 phone calls, we learned that the limo driver had taken us to the wrong airport. The right one was 2 hours driving distance. I think it was about 3 a.m. when the aircraft finally landed at Butler and got us airborne for Saginaw. It was well after 4 a.m. when we arrived. The temperature was 15 degrees below zero. There was no one to meet us, the sponsor having wisely given up and gone home to bed. We made it to the same position aboard 5:30 with a wake-up call for 8. Except for the fact that the stage crew was in a quarrelsome mood and wanted to strike, everything in Saginaw went fine. That afternoon, I bid goodbye to Sam in Detroit for the remaining 3 days. I'd be in professional hands. Show business people I have scheduled for New Orleans, a convention of the National Association of TV Broadcasters. I was very excited about that appearance. I would share the honors with Bishop Fulton Sheen. The Braniff plane took off for New Orleans, arriving over Mississippi in a violent thunderstorm. After circling the bouncing for 30 minutes, we went over to Shreveport, where we circled and bounced some more. Finally going on to Dallas. 5 minutes after landing, we went off again to New Orleans. It was a fruitless flight. Back at Dallas, we waited for another 30 minutes. Finally, at 11 p.m., we landed in New Orleans, 1/2 hour after the anticipated Bishop Kreskin appearance was over. I later heard that the bishop was magnificent. No one was at the airport to shepherd me to the hotel. Having arranged 3 hours sleep a night, nervous, shot, near exhaustion, I made it to the convention headquarters to learn that my lodgings was supposedly across the street in another hotel. However, there'd been another slip-up. After 2 hours, it became apparent that there was no room in town. At 3 a.m., I called a convention executive to announce that I was headed for Newark. I'd had it. He came screwing over and offered a company hospitality room, apologizing for the fact that someone had erred on reservations. He said, "Kreskin, you gotta be professional." I was trying. We went to the hospitality room. It was wall-to-wall chaos with empty liquor bottles and full ashtrays. There was a small bedroom off on one side. We went in. It was filled with TV sets and spotlights, but there was a bed in it. The executive said, "When you wake up, we'll get you in a room." He left in haste. I thought about taking a shower and went into the bathroom. The shower was filled with mattresses. There was another bedroom on the opposite side of the suite. That shower had assorted storage. I'm not sure why I did it, but I decided to go for a walk. It was daybreak when I got back and turned in. About 2 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Lou Reds in Eaton. He said, I've heard there's a vice president who's been sitting out in the reception room all day guarding it. It's been afraid to knock on your door. Go out and say hello." I performed for the TV broadcasters later that afternoon and then flew to Chicago for a nightclub date that night. I wasn't at all surprised when it was announced that O'Hara Field was iced up and we'd have to hold over. Milwaukee, we circled 20 or 30 times and then landed. I had 20 minutes to make the show. Operating now in a complete mental fog, I decided to keep going or else collapse, and took a flight to Newark about 2 a.m. Of course, Newark was fogged in and we couldn't land at 6 as scheduled. Instead, we went to LaGuardia. At that airport, I called my sister-in-law to say I would arrive by taxi. Otherwise, I was certain I'd get on a helicopter bound for Staten Island. As I was making the call, I watched a man and a woman stop outside the phone booth. The man picked up my bags and headed away. I dropped the phone and ran after him, yelling for him to stop. He pointed at the woman and said, "I thought they were hers." So ends the obviously true account of concert tour number 1, 1973. But it isn't always like that. Only sometimes. Unless I'm on a college show, which can often lead to a lively, serious discussion of ESP with students after the curtain, I prefer the hotel room and TV or reading. I'm usually back in the room within an hour, having had late supper. If there's a good horror movie, especially anything gothic, I try to sandwich it in between shows. I read a half dozen books a week and also relax by playing chess or cards. Hearts is aggressive without building the tension of bridge. Pinochle is fun, and I've gotten steady pinochle partners in 20 or 30 cities. In fact, I sometimes code forthcoming engagements by the name of my pinochle partners rather than by city names. Aside from dining occasionally with close friends in one place or another, it's basically the lonely life of any performer. On a schedule of many one-night stands at home the few days of the month that I can call my own, I relax by playing the piano. I also enjoy camping and hiking, but seldom have the time. Yet I love the life and never really think about doing anything else. Unhappy when I'm not working, I constantly explain to Lou that I'm overbooked and never have the time to do the things I'd like to do. That too is typical of most performers. Those who know better ignore it. Money has never been as important as breaking through some new area or application of ESP, of having a stubborn physical effort finally working. Then there are those goals that everyone has. Long ago, when playing to my Polish relatives at St. Michael's Hall in Bethlehem, I vowed I'd someday appear in Carnegie Hall. In early 1973, I did a one-man show in that hollowed theater. The only people I was really looking for beyond the footlights were the Poles from Bethlehem and Allentown. Friends and relatives from Cadwell and Catholic fathers from the Satan Hall. About 50 of my kin arrived on West 5th, 7th Street that Saturday night, a street they seldom visit, and this may all sound like a corny page out of the vaudeville movie, but I don't know any performer who doesn't have a lifelong dream of one special room in which to show his wares to realize a youthful ambition. Another milestone might have occurred. I could well be the only entertainer who has ever played chopsticks on Carnegie's grand piano. It was a musical Sacrilege.
SAC?
Rilege,
Oh, sacrilege?
I guess.
Sacrilege.
Sacrilege. I couldn't resist. Ignace Paderewski, another good Pole, might have turned over in his grave. I doubt it, though. Mr. Edison never completed his machine for spirit contact. Autobiographies are usually written late in life, but I considered what has gone into these pages as a midway account rather than an autobiography. Hopefully, I'll explore and experiment with ESP and suggestibility for a long time to come. There is so much to learn. I think that the human mind awaits many new and startling uses. Regretfully, we seldom call upon it to do more than it did yesterday or 1,000 years ago. And that's the end. Ho, ho, ho. That was pretty good.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, we still got a few minutes. So what'd you think of that particular book?
It was okay. I didn't find it terribly motivating.
No, it's not. I guess it's not a motivational book.
Yeah.
But I thought I'd read it because I always thought it was really interesting because I had actually seen him on stage and, as a performer.
Oh, wondering how he did it, right?
Yeah, like everybody else. How the hell do you do that?
Yeah.
And I think I gained a couple ideas as far as suggestibility goes. And I think that's probably the whole key,
Yeah.
And I think he explains, pretty good detail of how, whether you're in front of an audience or you're just in front of a customer, suggestibility and your performance really does make a big difference on how they accept whatever it is you're trying to present to them.
I thought I saw Reverend Dave on screen before, but he's disappeared.
Yeah, I understand he's supposed to be having his thing tonight at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock my time, I think.
Pray about that. Gosh.
Yeah, I'm not sure what time his time is.
No, I think he's Eastern. He's the same as me. Yeah, he's Eastern.
Yeah. So I know that whatever it is, it's I think it's going to be at 7 o'clock, but it's 4 o'clock my time. So yeah, he's going to be doing his tonight, and he's going to hope that a lot of people show up because he's got some new ideas that he wants to present to all of us, So I told him I'd do my best to be there.
I'm not sure I'll make it, but I'll try. I'm supposed to go someplace tonight, but I'm not sure what time I'm going out yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and apparently he's doing quite well as far as the surgery and everything. He says that I guess he had some problems with his heart, so they're going to do some kind of a test.
Yeah, that's kind of concern.
Yeah. So I told him I'd be praying about his heart. I said,
Mm.
but don't worry, I go to the doctor with myself as an example. It's kind of funny. I go to the doctor and the doctor says, "You're in great health." And I go to give blood and they won't let me because they say my heart skips. So I go to another doctor and he says, "Yes, there's obviously a skip there. We can see it." And I said, "Okay." And then I go to my next doctor for my physical, and she listened to my heart for a good 10 solid minutes. And she said, "If there's a skip in there, I can't find it."
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? That's funny.
Yeah. So I said, "Well, it must be," I told her, and I got a laugh out of her anyway. I said, "It must be because I'm an alien. It only skips on certain nights."
Funny.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's crazy. Sometimes I wonder about these doctors.
Yeah.
They put the machine on you and they say, "Hey, we're a little short of funds this month, so put the skip in there."
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Who knows?
You never know.
Yeah, my yacht payment is due. I need that skip.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think that's one good reason why I always believe in, always get at least one more opinion.
Yes, definitely.
So in my case, I don't know whose opinion to listen to because one says there's a skip and the other one says there's no skip. So I said, "Well, skip the loo to my darling. I'm not going to
Yeah.
worry about it."
Well, you shouldn't worry about it. They don't seem too concerned.
No, it's like that one thing I read, oh God, just 15, 20 years ago, and I was reading through it. And basically what the article said was that you realize that when you sneeze, if you think about the act of sneezing and how it kind of throws your whole body out of whack there for
Mm.
what, a half a second or whatever it is. And this article says, when you sneeze, there's a probability of 1 out of 1,000 that you could have a heart attack and die. And I said, "Oh, really? How do you stop from sneezing?"
Golly. Well, your heart stops. I know that, but gosh, I never heard that before about the odds of having a heart attack.
Yeah, well, I thought it was kind of crazy, but
But some people worry about that and have a heart attack worrying about it.
there you go. Well, that's one thing I don't know. I absolutely do not worry about because, first of all, life's too short. If God's got my number up and he's looking at it and he's saying to himself, "Oh, look at here. Bob's number's up. I guess we better give him a call. What the hell am I going to do? Anything? Hell no." He calls my number. I guess I got to go, right?
Well, it's over. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if I worry about it, he might be flipping that number around and saying, "Robert, you better quit worrying about it. I might have to call you sooner than I expected." Oh, well. Fun and games. What the heck?
Are you still recording?
Yeah, I am, believe it or not. I should probably say hello, goodbye, and all that good stuff, and see you on what's the day? Tuesday with a new book. And I hope everybody shows up. And so at that point in time, I will stop recording. Thank you.